I'll continue with that. I've just had a reminder to record, so the recording is now on. And as we are holding the Indigenous territories and lands and circumstances in our mind, just bringing a word, bringing to your mind what we know about the impacts and effects on Indigenous children through the residential school system and other ways in which children have been particularly impacted and victimized through the history of colonial settler acts in Canada as a way of, I think, seeing some of the commonalities between the circumstances here in Canada, and as we turn our attention and to concern for the children in Palestine, and knowing that the stories and circumstances are in some ways unique and particular, but also held in common, and that as we look at the things that happen that are influential in common, that how in both circumstances that the role of religion can be an instrument of power, but also as we come to this time and place together as many of us as people of faith, knowing that that can also be a force for liberation, calling us to raise our voices, sometimes as now in the political arena, in calling for justice and peace in places and circumstances where people are suffering. So as we come into this time together, holding those thoughts and hopes and awareness in our mind, I will say a word, just a very brief word about the Canada Stand Up for Children's Rights campaign. I know there are people here who are much more involved in that campaign than I am. So as I say my little piece, I'll invite anybody else if there's anything that I've missed to add, just as a way to set the context of this conversation, and then say a word of introduction to Libby, and then hand it over to Libby to guide us through this conversation. And so just to say about the campaign itself, and many of you, as I say, are involved already and know about it, but for those of you who might find it helpful to have a word of context, that the campaign was launched in 2020, particularly in the form of an e-petition that was sponsored by Paul Manley, who was an MP on Vancouver Island at the time, calling on the government of Canada to appoint a special envoy to monitor and report on the human rights situation of Palestinian children in the occupied territory and Gaza, because of the specific context of them living in a situation of military rule and being therefore subject to incarceration, interrogation, and detention in ways that contravene both the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of the Child and international law. So there's kind of a real circumstance and that into which the call for the special envoy is one of many responses, I think, to that circumstance. And so there has been, the campaign continues to build on the initial work in 2020 of that petition in a variety of forms of action, including days of public action on November 28th and 29th that some of you may know about, and some encouragement to be writing letters to MPs, but also the specific focus of today's conversation with Libby about sort of thinking, well, writing letters is good, and can we also be taking that, bringing our voices into direct conversation in forms of direct lobbying with members of parliament to get as many MPs to speak on behalf of and advocate for this appointment as possible. And I think as from those of you who attended the Pacific Mountain Town Hall, I think Mariana Harris, who's here, was saying that the goal is to get at least 10 advocates in Parliament. I think that there are already 2 who've spoken, who have said that they will advocate for this position. I think, well, 10 would be great, and we've got 15 ridings here, so let's keep going. So just kind of encouraging action and conversation. And so that's my just little piece to introduce the campaign. And anybody, so maybe Mariana, do you have a piece that you want to add to that?
I would just like to root it a little further back. In 2018, 18 parliamentarians went to visit Palestine, And when they came back, it was they that I think first made the recommendation that we have this special envoy. So that's the real basic platform from which we're working.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that, and really to root it in kind of a parliamentary awareness and bringing it back into parliamentary action. So thank you for that. And so bringing that conversation into sort of encouraging MPs to encourage the appointment of this special envoy, and how we can approach our MP to do that. And so just sort of, so that made me think of Libby, who I first heard actually at the UNJEPI, United Network for Justice and Peace in Palestine, Israel gathering in Ottawa in 2019, who spoke there very, very, I think, eloquently about the power and role and sort of strategies for lobbying, and how useful that conversation was then, and how it is good to have a chance to hear from her in this venue to look specifically at this action. And I think for many of you, Libby will need no introduction, but just to say a word that Libby was what are the dates? From 1997 to 2015, Libby was an NDP member of Parliament for Vancouver East. And in that time, serving a period of time as House Leader and also Deputy Leader for some years. And so I can think, and before that, actually, a long time community activist. So I can think of no one better to be joining us for this conversation, to be sharing her experience and expertise and giving us some guidance and tips in doing the work that we are gathered here to do. So with those words of introduction, I will just hand it over to you, Libby, to carry us on in this conversation.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jane, for the introduction and for setting us up here, and to Mary Ann as well for giving us some of the historical background. I'm delighted to join you today, and just want to thank all of you for taking the time out to be on this, well, let's call it a workshop, even though we're not, got our hands on the table together, but it is a workshop. And I want to give you a very brief overview of what I'm going to cover so you have an idea. I made myself notes. I mean, I know this stuff inside and out, but I always think I'm going to forget something. So I made myself some notes. And if you find the information useful and helpful, I can email the notes to Jane afterwards. We decided not to do a screen share because it's better to actually kind of look at each other. So I can email the notes so that you can look at them more carefully. So what that means is you don't have to worry right now about madly trying to write down what I'm saying, because I will be following along with my notes and you'll get to see them later. I'm going to try and keep my comments to no more than half an hour, less if possible, because I do want us to have a very good discussion and to hear your specific questions and queries about how this all works. So basically, the ground I'm going to cover is I want to talk to you about lobbying overall, like sort of an overview. Is it worth your time? Like, why are you here? What are you getting into? And is it worth doing? Then I'm going to cover some ground about what you need to do in advance of your actual lobby. Like, how do you set it up? So this is going to get very specific, very hands-on, like do this, do this, do this kind of thing. Because I want it to make it really concrete from what I've learned. And then we're going to talk about how you actually set up the logistics of the lobby. Then we're going to talk about what do you do when you actually have a meeting time and a date set, hopefully, big success. And then what to do in the meeting, and then what to do after the meeting. So that's what I'm going to cover for you today. So let's start with, is lobbying worth your time? Like, what are you getting into? And I would say that, I've been lobbied thousands of times as an elected representative, but I have also lobbied myself. I lobby government ministers, I lobby other people and, provincial. So I'm very, very familiar with what the territory is. And I would say that one of the things that's always concerned me is that lobbying is used very minimally, as many groups and people are often either intimidated by the process of lobbying, or they lack the knowledge about how the political process works and how to affect change. Like, people just don't know where to begin. It's sort of like a mystery, right? And when we think of lobbying, we often think of it as the purview of very powerful elites. And of course, that's true. There are very powerful interests who invest enormous amounts of time, money, expertise, resources. They, all these lobby firms, they have people hired specifically who do nothing else but work on lobbying. It's a very sophisticated business. And of course, they're doing it to protect vested interests, usually. And often that runs counter to what I would call the public interest. So yes, lobbying is well used by people who already have a lot of power. And a lot of it, of course, is informal and behind closed doors and behind the scenes. And so we don't even know what's going on. But I would say, from my experience, that it is definitely worth the time and investment to do what I call community lobbying. It can be a very powerful force to affect transformative change. Why is that? Well, it works on a couple levels. First of all, lobbying, it empowers our own experience as activists, and it strengthens the work that we do together with each other, and it gives meaning to the work that we do together. It's very concrete. It actually gives voice to membership, to a group, right? It's something we can all participate in. So we're not just leaving something to a leadership to say, well, we pass a resolution at our conference and we'll wait for our president or chair to send a letter on our behalf. This is very participatory. So a really big benefit of community lobbying is that it actually empowers us about our own voice, our own strength of what it is we can do together. Equally, though, is that when we do that, we actually can influence what goes on. And some people actually find that hard to believe, because unfortunately, we do have a very cynical view of politics. We see it as a very sort of stuck in the mud, static thing. You can't move them. All politicians are bad. And of course, we read that every day in the media. It's a turnoff, right? And these forces want us to be turned off. They want us to disengage. They want us to feel cynical, because the people who already have power, they're very engaged. They know what they should do, and they know how to use the voice and the resources that they have. But unfortunately, for average people, ordinary people who care deeply about different issues, it's not like people don't care. But as I said, it's sort of a mystery about how to do it, how to engage in the political process. And two, people really question whether or not it can actually produce anything. And so I want to tell you that after, doing this for nearly 50 years, I started doing sort of political community activism when I was 19 in the downtown East Side. I've come to understand that politics is a very fluid situation. It's a dynamic, right? I mean, otherwise nothing would change, right? It's always in flux. It's always changing. It's always being influenced. What goes on in Ottawa, what goes on in Victoria or in your council. And so the question for us is, how are we able to get in there to influence what that political agenda is? How are we able to use our voice? And so I would say that lobbying, community lobbying, is a very powerful force, because it is accessible, it is doable, and we can actually get some really concrete results. Now, I do want to say right off that community lobbying is really part of a bigger spectrum of work for political change. And transformative change is influenced by both internal and external factors, right? There's the political dynamics internally within a political party, within a political caucus, within caucus itself, within the media. There are external factors in terms of, you know, some of the things I've just mentioned, powerful groups that are trying to organize themselves. So lobbying is part of a wider spectrum of working for change. But it doesn't exclude other forms of activism. And what are some of those other forms? And, you know, in fact, a diagram that I once put together, which I couldn't find, sort of does a circle to show that lobbying is just part of a spectrum that might include, for example, grassroots mobilization. It might include legal action. It might include broadly based campaigns on social media or demonstrations on the street. I mean, I'm sure we've all been to, you know, big peace demonstrations. I remember on the war against Iraq, you know, where we had like 35,000 people in Vancouver. We had the Walk for Peace, you know, up to 80,000 people. There are campaigns that take place in workplaces, in faith centers, and on campuses, and of course in local communities. So that's all part of the spectrum. Lobbying is only one element. So it's not like we're saying these other things don't count. They do. And in fact, when these various layers of activism become connected and related, then you see very powerful changes take place. Now that's very sophisticated work, right? It takes a level of organization, of connectedness between movements, between groups, building alliances. I mean, this is the stuff that, you know, gets studied and we sort of try to practice it imperfectly in our lives. But so lobbying is just one element, but it's an element that is often overlooked and undervalued because maybe it's not considered, you know, kind of like out there on the street and so on. And of course, people are very much now into social media campaigns on Facebook and Twitter and things like that. And they're all good. You know, I'm not dishing any of those things. Letter writing, petitions to Parliament, it's all part of the mix. But lobbying is a very key component that we need to learn more about. And if we can think about, you know, do these things work? They do. I mean, you think of things like Black Lives Matter or Idle No More or the peace movement or any international human rights campaign. They all have had an impact on transformative change when they have been multi-leveled, right? And when you see these different elements begin to come together. So we're not going to talk about that. That's sort of another discussion. It's a bigger picture discussion about how these things can interrelate and how we work with each other as coalitions, as alliances. What we're going to focus on today is the question of how do we actually do that one element of community lobbying. And to just say it's overlooked, I think, because we don't know much about how to do it. We don't know where to begin. So somebody says, well, yeah, go meet with your MP. Okay, well, how do I do that? What if they say no? What does that mean? Is it a one-shot thing? Can I just write them an email? What does that mean? So lobbying is not just writing a letter or an email or signing a petition, although it could include both of those things. It is slightly broader. So I would define community lobbying as something that is primarily focused on face-to-face interaction with people, usually elected, but not exclusively. I mean, you could lobby, a board of directors of an organization that's doing something nefarious that you want to try and influence. But primarily, it's usually elected representatives that you are engaged with lobbying. And as I say, the focus is to interact personally. And it's usually with people who are in positions of power to make decisions that affect us and the issues we care about. Now, people often think of lobbying as you lobby the government. big no-no. Government is made up of many different components. Parliament is made up of the government, the opposition, other parties, individual members of parliament, different kinds of caucuses. So there's a whole sort of holistic thing that goes on there. So the idea that we're only lobbying the government is kind of a myth and a misnomer, because it actually doesn't get you very far. So lobbying decision makers, usually elected, is what we're going to focus on today. So what is it that makes lobbying kind of something that's important? Like, what is it about it that is key? And so what I've identified is that the key factor in lobbying is about developing ongoing relationships with decision makers and developing trust in a way that works to bring about the change on the issues that you're working on, even with those that you don't agree with and are trying to change. So lobbying is not about a one-shot deal, one meeting. It is actually trying to make a connection, trying to develop a trustful relationship, and using that process to gain traction, to create influence, and to work really kind of on the outside and the inside. That's what lobbying is about. That is what we're trying to do. And it is amazingly, surprisingly, very easy to do. It is not rocket science. It is not some weird thing, you know, where you need all kinds of training or, you know, background or of it is pretty hands-on and it's pretty straight up. I would say that it is a matter of rigorous organization, methodology, and follow-up. We can do all of that. And we can have a plan of action to do all of that. And what I like to say about lobbying is that if you can think of it, strangely, as sort of a game, it's actually fun. The idea of doing sleuth work, it's almost like being a cop on a crime scene, right? You're looking for clues. You're finding intelligence. You're gathering intelligence from your own team, your own network. You're putting together a puzzle about who's doing what in those decision makers that you're trying to get through. And it's giving you an insight and an intelligence that allows you to do more. So it's actually a very fun thing to do because there is a lot of sleuth work and sort of figuring out who the players are and who you want to focus on. So that's just an overview of lobbying. That's part one. So hopefully you've got in your head sort of generally what it's about, that it's a good thing to do. It's powerful. It can produce results. So what do you need to do? Well, in advance, there's some homework to be done for the group or network or organization or the individuals who are coming together who want to do some lobbying. First, number one is define the issue you want to work on. And that you may say, well, that's a no-brainer. Of course, we know what issue we want to work on. Maybe not. Defining that issue and making it manageable is actually something that needs really good discussion and brainstorming amongst your group before you actually engage in lobbying. I can't tell you how many times I've been lobbied where people would dump a ton of material on my desk, like an issue that they'd worked on for 20 years, 10 years, whatever. A, they thought I would understand it. And B, they just kind of like put it out there, right? Well, that's almost impossible to take on. So the key to lobbying in defining the issue is making it manageable. That it gives you that access point. It gives you that foot in the door. It gives you that contact to build that relationship so you can get to the bigger issue. So defining the issue that you want to lobby on is very important, because it's giving you the parameters, and it may be just one step of something that's much bigger. Now, we know in this case, it's about the appointment of a special envoy. Now, that may take some further discussion, that are there preliminary steps even prior to that? Or is that how the group wishes to define the issue? That's something that you will discuss at some point, I hope. So, but suffice it to say that open-ended massive agendas don't work. They are doomed for failure, because nobody will be able to relate to it. Well, maybe the odd person here and there who, you know, it happens to be their bag, and they'll go, yeah, I get that. Yeah, I'm on it, right? But for most elected representatives, they may know nothing about what you're talking about, or they may have a lot of misinformation. And we certainly know when it comes to the Middle East and Israel, Palestine, there is so much misinformation and negativity and you know, outright lies, that it is a very complicated issue. So lobbying on this is probably one of the toughest things to do, but still it is manageable and it is doable. So that was number one, define the issue. Your group will do that. You need to do that. Number two, list your desired outcomes. Be very specific. What is your goal? Now, obviously, in this case, your goal is to have a special envoy appointed, right? But there are probably preliminary goals, again, that will come about through your brainstorm. Remember, this is all the advanced work that we're getting into now. So it may well be, you know, one of your preliminary goals, because Marianne gave a very important clue about that 2018 MP visitation to Israel and Palestine and the occupied territories, is to bring awareness about that report, to reference it back to that report. That may be a desired outcome before you even get to the special envoy. So listing that and being very clear what your issue is, what you want to see as an outcome, will help you figure out what you need to do in terms of materials. Number three, who is on your team? Who is actually doing the lobby? How many people? Can you count on them to follow through? Are people willing to take a little bit of sort of workshopping like we're doing now, but probably a follow-up? And, you know, just how big is it? You know, it might be 10 people, it might be 20 people. I've been involved in lobbies through the Canadian Labour Congress where they had 600 people involved because they were lobbying every single MP. It was very sophisticated on anti-scab legislation. I remember that one very well. And they had 2 people assigned to pretty well every MP. They had a day on the Hill lobbying. It was a very big, that was the biggest one that I was ever involved in. But I've been involved in lots of lobbying efforts with students on drug policy reform, on the Middle East, on housing issues, where, you know, it was anywhere from 10 to maybe 30 or so people that were involved in lobbying. So knowing what your team is and how many people there are is a very important thing. You don't want it to be loosey-goosey, because knowing who you can count on is going to help you target who you're lobbying. So once you know that, how many people you've got, then you can, number 4, make a list of who you're going to lobby. Now, you may say, well, why do we need that? Well, just be MPs, won't it? Well, there's 338 MPs. It's very unlikely that you have the resources and the level of sophistication to be able to lobby 338 MPs. So it's going to be a much lower number. So how do you select that? This is again where you need to brainstorm. And keeping in mind, you know, like people think, well, I got to lobby the minister. You know, I got to lobby the Minister of Foreign Affairs. It would be the new Minister of Foreign Affairs, Melanie Joly, who would make this decision. Let's go after her. Not so much. A, you'll never get to meet with her, or highly unlikely. And B, she herself is being influenced by all kinds of forces. So the question becomes, who do you or who do we need to get to influence the people who will influence her? See, and this is where the sleuth work begins to come in, because you got to start looking at, okay, what is the political landscape? If we've got, say, 20 people that we know we can count on to lobby, and if we're going to pair ourselves up, maybe, then we're looking at maybe 10 to 20 individuals that could be lobbied. Let's just use that as a general reference point. So who would they be? Well, you got to go through and think about who are the people who might have influence on this issue. Well, certainly the minister, but there's also possibly other ministers. There's also what we call parliamentary secretaries, who are assigned to ministers to be their like political elected assistant. And parliamentary secretaries hold a lot of power and sway, and are usually, you know, not that well known in the public realm, but they're a very valuable resource. It may be bureaucrats. Some people have connections within, you know, Global Affairs Canada. I had a guy that I used to talk to all the time, and he would very quietly kind of give me bits and pieces of information that was helpful to me. So, you know, that might be someone who's on your radar as well. It would probably include members of parliament from other parties who are the critic for that particular issue. That would be a key one. So who is the foreign affairs or the global affairs critic for the NDP, for the Green Party, for the Bloc Québécois, for the Conservatives? Yes, you do not rule out the Conservatives. You do not assume that just because you think that they're horribly whatever, that they will be opposed. Some of the trips that I was involved in the past actually had a Conservative member, right? They were actually sympathetic to the question of human rights and Palestinians in the Middle East. So don't rule it out. So certainly foreign affairs critics for the parties, but also the parliamentary committee structure. What members from different parties are on, for example, the Foreign Affairs Committee? Know who they are, go research them, find out who they are. They're most likely to be the critic as well, but usually parties have one or two people depending on their party standing. So it would be, you know, you might find that the Conservatives have 3 people on the Foreign Affairs Committee. The Liberals would maybe even have 4 people, right? So there's another clue. So if they're on the Foreign Affairs Committee, it means that they are already dealing with this file overall of international affairs, human rights, that kind of thing. The Foreign Affairs Committee used to have a subcommittee on human rights. I don't know if it still exists, and it was actually a very good committee, and they often produced a lot of unanimous reports and would do their own lobbying of the minister on various issues. So this is, again, coming back to your intelligence gathering. You know who your team is. Who are you going to lobby? You pick kind of your best bets, right? Now, it might also include people that you know already are sympathetic within a political party, because the goal of doing this is to find a champion within each party, within each caucus, somebody that you've built that relationship. You know, you may have people that you contact every now and again, but the big goal would be to have one person or maybe 2 people, maybe more, within each political party that is your person. You can go to them, you can phone them up, you can email them, you can say, what's going on? And they will tell you. And you know why? Because you've developed that trust with them, right? We go back to that issue of why are you doing this? You're developing a relationship. You're developing trust. That's how you find out what is going on the inside. And that's how they also learn what's going on the outside. Some of my best experiences as a member of parliament over 18 years was the work I was able to do with activists on the outside that I had developed a relationship with. And I would work with them, they would work with me, we'd brainstorm, we'd figure out what the hell are we gonna do, right? And it was beautiful. It was a really wonderful experience to get to do that kind of stuff. And so that's what you're aiming for. So, you know, jumping on 300 MPs is a lot of work and you're not going to do it. I mean, you can do a general campaign. I'm not ruling that out. You can decide to send out a letter to every MP just to see what you get back. I mean, that's all fine. That's sort of a general level, but to do the focused, direct relationship building, you will have a smaller group. So that was number 4. Number 5, once you've figured out who you're lobbying and who they are, you'll want to do a little bit of research on them, kind of get their scope, what kind of riding do they represent, what kind of things have they done in the past, how proactive are they? Are they seen as sort of an independent player within their party? That kind of thing. The next thing then, number 5, would be to actually develop the written material that you're going to provide when you lobby. So we're still in the advanced, setting the groundwork, doing the homework stage. This is very important because, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes when people, you know, have actually got a lobby meeting with you, they come up with just a ridiculous amount of information. And do you know where it goes? In the recycling bin, never to be read again. So your written material has to be clear, concise, and understandable. Never ever assume that the person you're lobbying knows as much as you do on the issue. You have worked on this maybe for 2 years, maybe for 20 years. They may have only read about it in the media. They may have a very skewed view, and certainly we know on this issue that is true, of what you're trying to do. So presenting the defined issue as you've defined it, having clear, concise, and understanding material, I would say no more than 2 pages. That's tight, right? That is really tight to say a lot about what you want to say in 2 pages. You got to really narrow it down. You got to focus it, right? And putting it down to a level, not because they're stupid, but because they just may not know about it. And what should that briefing material include? Well, you'll figure it out, but generally, I would say it should include a brief background, very brief. It should have some level of cited evidence or facts. You want to base your demand, if you will, the issue you're lobbying about based on evidence and facts. But it also has to include a human story, if that's possible. And this actually, you know, sometimes people really focus on evidence and they haven't tapped into the emotion of what they're trying to communicate. And I have to say, the right wing is much better at doing that than the left wing is. On the left, we tend to, if I could generalize like this, and assume that you're all kind of on the progressive side of the political spectrum, I think you probably are. We tend to rely on evidence, and we think that's what wins people over. And if you read people like George Lakoff in the US, who's done brilliant work about, you know, again, how political decisions are influenced and made, he does brilliant stuff on how the right really taps into people's deep emotions that might be based on anger, might be based on fear, but it could also be based on empathy, on compassion, on love, right? These are all very important elements. So yes, evidence is good, but so is the human story. So is that emotional connection. And then finally, in that briefing material, and this should go without saying, but I'm going to say it because I had experiences where people lobbied me, they put a whole bunch of material on me, and they never actually said what they were asking for. If you can believe it, they never actually told me. It was just like this big stuff, you know, it was like some big thing. And they never actually got down to the nitty-gritty of what did they want me to do. So to me, that is like a huge floodlight, an illumination of a key to what you're doing here. Because unless you know what you want someone to do, then the expectation that they're going to somehow discover it on their own, or magically it's going to come to them and volunteer without you having even asked, is very unlikely. So you have to know that. What do you want this person to do? So in defining that, remember, you've defined the issue. Now you're going to define what do you want them to do. I want to say the trick is, because I think it is actually a bit of a trick. The trick is you want the person to do something that is so manageable and so reasonable that they can't say no. So if you go in there and say, well, we want Canada to, get Israel out of the occupied territories, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's like, oh, great. Okay. I don't know how I'm going to do that as an individual member of parliament. But if you go into your meeting and say, would you raise this issue of a special envoy within your caucus? Would you be willing to write a letter to the minister inquiring whether or not she would ever respond to the recommendation from the 2018 report? Whatever it is, it's got to be something manageable that the MP can go, yeah, I could do that. Yeah, that's reasonable. I could do that. Foot in the door. Foot in the door. That's what you're aiming for. You're aiming to get a connection with that person individually so that what? You can follow up. So it is a bit of a trick. It's like drawing them in. Very, very important in the lobbying, as opposed to expecting, like a resolution of whatever it is you're presenting in one meeting. Totally unrealistic, not going to happen. So you make it reasonable. All right, so that's how you're done your intelligence gathering, your brainstorming, setting up the issue. Now I better move on here. Setting up the logistics. So what you need to do is develop a spreadsheet or a simple accounting format of your choice of who is meeting who with times and dates, and include a space for follow-up and debrief. So you do need to have, like some documentation within your group. So someone's keeping track of this because it's sort of multi-layered, right? And if possible, you want to make assignments based on who you're going to lobby, who is doing the lobbying, if possible, to include two people, one to take notes and one to speak. That's preferable. If that's a stretch, you could do it with one, but it's much better with a team because you give each other support, you can practice with each other, and you've got one person who's going to focus on taking notes, and you're going to have one person who does the speaking. 3, seek a meeting in person if possible. Now, these days it might be via Zoom. And this is a very key point because a lot of people say, well, I tried to get a meeting, I wrote an email, blah, 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 nothing, never got a reply. Okay, this is where you become a bit more of a cop and you become pushy and persistent. You have a right to meet with your elected representative. So this is why the pairing with your local MP, either connected through your church, like you may not live in the riding, but if your church, whatever MP it is, and I talked to Jane about this, so you've got a connection, right? then you start being really pushy and persistent. You let the office staff, the constituency assistants know, for example, that you know the weeks that Parliament isn't sitting on the parliamentary calendar, and that you know that that MP will be in the riding, most likely. You can start phoning the office saying, well, I sent an email on I never got a reply. I'd like to get a reply. I want to have a meeting. No, well, they're busy. They're booked up. Well, I want a date. I really want to meet on this issue. Worst case scenario, you head down to the office and you actually go in and say, you know what? I've emailed you. I've phoned you. I haven't had a meeting set up. I want a meeting. And I actually did that with a minister once. I went in and sat in the minister's office and refused to leave until I got a meeting date set with the minister. And they didn't know what to do with me. I just sat there and told them I had the media outside, which wasn't quite true, but close enough. Now, the one tricky thing is they may say, well, what do you want to meet about? Now, as soon as you say Palestine, they go, oh, well, I don't know, our member doesn't really have anything to do with that. Well, hopefully you pick people who do have something to do with it. They're on the committee, they're a critic, whatever, they're on a human rights committee. So you might have to be a little bit vague. You may not say, we want a meeting about appointing a special envoy. You may say, for example, again, this is where you'd brainstorm. We want to have a meeting about the situation for children in the Middle East. You kind of want to make it a bit vague, make it as palatable as possible, because again, your job is to get your foot in the door, but you make it as personal as you can. Okay, next level. Once you have a meet, so let's assume now you finally got the meeting. Okay, you got the meeting date and time set up. What do? Well, you do some research on the person you're meeting. You develop any intelligence you can on what they're about that might be helpful to you. So you want to go in with as much knowledge about them. They probably won't have much knowledge about you. Number two, keep to the time limits. Probably your meeting is only half an hour. It will go by really fast. You need to practice before you go, hopefully with your buddy. One of you be the MP and one of you be the speaker. And leave time for the person to respond to you. That's happened to me many times where the people lobbying went blah, 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 and they ran on and ran on and ran on, and then the meeting was over and I never got to say anything. Now, the other side of that coin is that they took over the conversation. MPs are very skillful people at managing a conversation. It's our job. We know how to do it super, super well. And so before you know it, you're not saying anything. They're doing all the talking and they're telling you they did this in 1924 or 1988 and they went here and they did that and they were on this. It's like, nah. You don't want to hear that. You have to very skillfully come back to your agenda. And you do have to give them an opportunity to respond, but you don't let them take over the conversation. So you have to be polite, but you have to be assertive. And you take notes. The one person, if you've got two people, their job is nothing else but taking notes, nothing else. Very important, because you'll need that for later. Number 5, be polite and non-aggressive. You may feel very irritated and you may feel even angry, particularly if the person is giving you a whole load of BS. And you have to, again, what is your goal? Your goal is to try and develop a relationship, and your goal is to try and get them do something that is manageable. And if you come across as angry, bitter, uptight, pissed off, they're just going to get through the meeting and that will be the end of that, right? You're trying to find engagement. So remember that your goal is about creating an ongoing relationship built on trust and openness. And then finally, don't forget to ask what it is you want them to do. You got to get to that. You got to get it out and then get a response to them. And it's okay to say, will you do that? Some people feel it's like, I shouldn't really ask that. You know, it's not my place to say, yes, it is. These are elected officials. You have a right to say, you know, here's this issue, here's this information. What is your response? Are you going to do this? Can we hear back from you? So to be specific. Last thing now, after the meeting, those notes become very important because you are going to send your notes into the organizer or whoever is got that spreadsheet, and you're going to start collating the information. What did you guys learn? And you will set up a debrief session amongst all of you, if possible. What did you learn? Who said what? Now, it's easy to be fooled. MPs are very good. Like, most MPs want to be nice. They want to be polite. They want to win people too, right? So it's a game of winning people over on either side. And so you may come away feeling like, wow, they were so interested. Wow, that was just great. Well, okay, lovely. But it's the specifics you're looking for. What are they actually going to do? What will they do to follow up? And so once you've debriefed on that and you've got yourself a list, then it becomes clear through another brainstorm what you need to do to follow up, right? If they said, yeah, I'll write a letter, well, within a month, you check in and say, did you write the letter? If they said they were going to raise it somewhere at the committee, did that happen, right? So I can't tell you what that is because you'll know from your debrief, but then there'll be, you know, a follow-up, and then you take it to the next level. You keep going. Now, the group may have narrowed down by then because based on that debrief, you may realize that of your 20 MPs that you spoke to, 10 of them were really, you know, it's just not going to go much further. But you may decide that there's 10 or 8 or whatever it is, that there's something there, right? You got your foot in the door and you can go to another step. You can start building that relationship. And so it starts taking on its own course from that point. So I'm going to stop there. And Jane, you can figure out how you want to manage comments and questions, but I hope that's given you a bit of a sense. I hope I wasn't too specific about the lobbying 101.
Thank you so much, Libby. I found that very practical and helpful and useful, and glad to have this on the recording and look forward to your notes. And I noticed that it is just coming up to 2 o'clock now. So I think that anybody who needs to leave now, or if you do have a question, you can put it in the chat before, but hopefully, Libby, you can stay a little bit longer with any questions. And others who leave, that will be continued on the chat, or I mean, in the recording. And so just, I will unpin, if I can do this, remove the pin to put the regular gallery view back on, and just to see if anybody, I've got a couple of questions that I would like to ask, but just open it up to anybody else, if anybody else has any questions in response to what you've said so far. So if you've got a question, just raise your hand and I'll see if I can see you. I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I will just jump in and ask my questions. So just a little bit of guidance in terms of where to find stuff out. So when you're saying that if there might be a committee, you mentioned the Foreign Affairs Committee, is that information, is the House of Commons website the best source to go for that? Or do you have any other locations of where to direct people in terms of digging around to find the information that you've suggested people look for? So that's question number one. And then another question, just to build on that, in terms of allies and advocates or people to build connections with, what about journalists? Are they good people to be talking to be getting on board in the issue?
Okay, well, on the first one, the parliamentary website is probably the best source of information because it would have all of the standing committees of Parliament, of which the Foreign Affairs Committee is one. Now, unfortunately, we will not know the membership of those committees. Parliament not reconvenes, and the new Parliament begins November 22nd, and it takes at least a week, sometimes 2 weeks, for the whips of each party to name the members to each committee, and it goes through what's called the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, and then it becomes public. And unfortunately, that could take a couple of weeks. So you may not know, if you're planning to do your lobby before Christmas, you may not know, although there is another source, and that is that each party on their own website will probably list the critics that they've named. Like all the leaders are, like O'Toole is just about to do it. The media are waiting to find out who he's naming as his what's called shadow cabinet. The NDP have already done it. The Bloc Québécois, I don't know, but they've probably done it because they've already had 3 caucus meetings. So they probably have their shadow critics already named. So you could go to individual party websites, but probably the best source is the parliamentary website, because it tells you when the committees are going to meet, what they're meeting about. You can even look at minutes and reports. It's a great source of information. There's also another website that I've used on and off. It's called Our Commons. And it's, I don't know who runs it, but it's a pretty good kind of accessible overview of parliamentary stuff in the House of Commons. So it's called Our Commons. So they would be pretty good. And then as well, all MPs have a website. They actually get it through the House of Commons, and usually it's their name.ca. So I still have my website. It's libbydavies.ca. I just kind of turned it over from an MP website into my own personal website, and I still keep it going. It has all of my parliamentary archives on it and so on. So every MP has a website, and you'll see that as well on the parliamentary website. It will list every MP, their riding, their phone number, their address, their website, that kind of thing. And so going on individual websites, if you've got kind of an idea of who some of the MPs are that you might want to contact, you can just go on their website and see what you find out on the website, right? So again, this is really fun, I hope, intelligence gathering work that you're doing to get your list up and running. In terms of the media, yes, if I think at a certain level, if the group is well organized, you begin to know within the media who are friendly journalists on the particular issue that you're working on. Now, again, on this issue, it's a bit hit and miss, but there are some. I'm trying to think in my own head if I can name any right off the top of my head. Marianne might know, but there, and you know, if you're doing an event in Ottawa, if you're doing a lobbying where you're going to do a press conference because it's actually in Ottawa, and you're doing a press conference, yes, you would certainly alert the media and try and get an advanced story, and get a good story on it. So the media can be helpful, but it's kind of like a level of resources that you require to have someone doing that and stay on top of it.
Great, thanks for those answers. And I see that Mariana has a hand up, and then Dorothy, and then I think Keith. So go ahead, Mariana.
Well, I was doing a little research today and found some very good news, and that is that Heather Mcpherson is going to be the Foreign Affairs Critic for the NDP.
Yeah.
And Don Davies is going to be the Deputy Foreign Affairs. So I was really, really pleased because those are 2 people that are positive about Palestine. And I see that John asked whether we were organizing particular MPs to lobby. What we're trying to do now is get people to lobby their own MP in as many places as we can.
That's good. That's fine. I mean, you can have a targeted list, as I spoke about, but actually getting a general level of intelligence just based on your local connection is also very good. It can be very fruitful. So it's a good plan.
Thanks, Mariana. And over to Dorothy and then Keith after that.
It's slightly off topic, but because I've got to hear Libby, do you call it lobbying when you're doing urgent action? Like today in the Globe and Mail, we're learning that the safe houses for the Afghanistans are no longer, have no money left. And the government to date has said that they will not supply. Now, if some of us were really wanting to move on that one, and I don't want to hijack this agenda, what do you do?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure I would call it, I mean, anytime you're trying to influence someone to do something, you could call it lobbying. I don't know if you know where the term comes from, but of course, we're based on the British parliamentary system, which is archaic and sexist and racist and all colonial and all the rest of it. But that's what we're based on. And lobbying was literally buttonholing someone in a lobby, right? To bend their ear. That's where the term comes from. So anytime you're, having that interaction, you could call it lobbying, but I would call that more of a sort of a rapid response campaign where you've got something that's just come up really fast. You want to, fire off some emails, some phone calls, a press release, whatever. I mean, that's really more of a kind of a fast response campaign. I think lobbying is more about a longer term plan because you are trying to develop ongoing relationships.
Thanks for the answer.
Thanks for your question, Dorothy, and over to you, Keith.
Hi, thanks, Libby. Appreciated this. I thought I knew a bit. Now I know a lot more. So thank you very much. I'm wondering about some of the internal stuff that I know has gone on in the NDP caucus. I used to work for Alex Adamanenko for a few campaigns.
Oh, wonderful.
Alex told me about some of the issues he had when signing on the petition for Gaza.
Yeah.
And my own MP now is Alistair McGregor, and I thought I'd just do a quick research on Alistair and see that he's tried to drop down on both sides of the Holocaust definition of anti-Semitism. He's tried to support it and support Palestinians at the same time. So it might give me some insight on how to be in conversation with Alistair. And I'm wondering if, is it helpful to point people to specific resources that they can use to validate? So if I talk to Alistair about independent Jewish voices and another definition, if that would be helpful in giving him some ammunition to, or a place of comfort to stand with, to know that he's got some support in the Jewish community if he looked at a different definition of anti-Semitism. So that kind of research.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Alex Adamanenko was one of my best buddies, and he was like an amazing MP, and he was amazing on this issue, and he never wavered, and he was outspoken in the caucus. I can't say that about some of my other colleagues, unfortunately. So it's a very, this is get back to my point about how fluid politics is, right? It's not static. It's sort of like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 2 steps sideways. And I mean, we focus on the NDP because we sometimes think they might do the best on this issue, but it's been a really checkered pattern, right? Of like trying to play both sides, of seeing it as an equal footing issue, which of course it is not. We're talking about an occupier with enormous power. We're talking about occupied who have no power. But the myth of trying to say, well, it's an equal issue. It's not. And so that's a very common response from politicians. But for Alistair, I know with that no IRHA, because I worked on that a lot at the convention, and I know he was sort of like, here and here. So yes, trying to open his eyes to another definition would be really helpful so that he can begin to see that he doesn't have to be captive to, one powerful lobby, right? But that there's this huge other groundswell, from IJV, from, Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, from UNJEPI and the United Church, that it's broad, right? That will give him some level of comfort. And then, you know, on this issue, though, I think that parliamentary report that Mariana referred to from 2018 is really important. Why? Because it was an all-party report. It was based on a real visit, and it was actually a very reasonable, just what we've been talking about. It was very reasonable and very manageable. So to reference that as a sort of a parliamentary document that was tabled in the House is very good. Maybe he knows about it, maybe he doesn't. But you have to kind of stay on it, right? Because, like, is he going to, you know, would he go speak to Don Davies? Would he go speak to Heather Mcpherson? You know, would he show that he's got some support for this idea of a special envoy? You know, like I'm
just thinking about, sorry, I did, and this might translate for other folks, I'm not sure, but Alistair's located in the Cowichan Valley. That's where he lives and farms.
Yeah.
His riding includes Langford, which is a chunk of Victoria, and there are synagogues and Jewish community in Langford that he might not be that connected to. And so I'm wondering about perhaps in our lobby, maybe we need to bring in some Langford folks to talk to him and give him some assurance from that end of the riding. That might be part of his internal thinking.
Yeah. And also if you've got connections with IJV, to find out if there's a really good activist in Langford or, you know, in his riding that could make that connection with you. Do it together, right? So you've got United Church and IJV. Wow, what a beautiful, powerful combination that is, right? The two of you as local constituents. Bingo.
Happens we do Jewish fast for Dazinger. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Keith. Go ahead, Helen.
Yeah, just a quick question, very pragmatic question, Libby, about emails versus letters. I have this feeling emails are of no effect. I don't know, are they? Is it better to have a letter that, you know, you sat down, you actually constructed and mailed versus an email? I don't know. What's your view on that?
Both are okay. I mean, you know, MPs get volumes and volumes of emails.
Well, that's what I wondered about.
Yeah. And when it's obvious that it's a form email and it's come from outside the riding, you're probably never going to get a reply because, you know, the MPs, of course, twig to the fact that there are these email campaigns that go on. And if the issue becomes big enough, they'll do a standard response and they'll send the same response to everybody who wrote on the issue. So if you do send an email, I would say if you can make it clear, A, that you're a constituent, and B, you put it in your own words, you're going to get probably more likelihood of a response than if you didn't do that.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
And and as and we've gone some time, so for however long you're available, Libby, we'll
I'm good.
But for anybody who needs to go, please head out as you need to. And we've got the recording still going. So, and I see that Mariana, you've got your hand up again. So go ahead.
I was just wanting to ask Libby, is there any point to trying to develop a relationship with the EA in the office of the MP or in Ottawa? Is that helpful?
Oh yeah, that's a good point, Mariana. You know, an MP's office is very busy, and their riding assistants and their Ottawa assistants become like, you know, part of the MP in effect. And particularly once you've made the initial connection and you found out, so for example, with someone like Nikki Ashton, when you've made the connection, and well, we know Nikki is very good on this issue and very sympathetic, you may end up mostly dealing with her staff, right? Like for meetings or follow-up, or, you know, is she going to do a petition or is she going to do a statement? They become almost like the voice of the MP to you. And that's fine. You know, that's fine if you develop that good relationship with staff. I certainly did with my staff, and they would in effect manage the file. I was also very hands-on, and not all MPs are like that. I was always very hands-on myself in talking to people directly, because that's what I really like doing. But for a lot of MPs, they will rely on their staff to kind of manage that relationship. And that's fine, because you know that staff person is talking to the MP. very frequently.
Well, maybe I've got a related question in terms of, it sounds like you're saying that, so the schedule of where the MP will be at any given time, either in the riding or in Ottawa, is available on the parliamentary website.
Yes.
Does it make a difference to know whether or not that to contact the office while they're in Ottawa, or to kind of study the schedule to be intending to approach people when they're back in their home riding? Do you have a sense of a different emphasis on one place or the other?
Well, that parliamentary website has a calendar. It's already up, and it shows what we call our constituency week. So Parliament meets generally from September to June. It's like a school year, but within that school year, they usually go 3 or 4 weeks in a row in Ottawa, and then they have a week back in the riding. Sometimes it's actually 2 weeks during spring break. So for example, they're going to go back November the 22nd, then they will rise for the Christmas break for a couple of weeks. In fact, I think it's on the calendar, they're not actually going back till the end of January. I mean, this is one thing that Trudeau's doing that's just driving me bonkers, is that he's really minimizing the amount of time that MPs are actually in Ottawa doing work, which is really bad. Anyway, that's me editorializing, forget that. So you can go on the parliamentary website and figure out when those MPs are going to be in their riding. Now, usually, I would say 99% of the time, it is the constituency or the riding staff who are setting up the appointments in the riding. So if you know that week X, they won't be in Ottawa, they'll be in the riding, then a few weeks prior to that, you start phoning the local office saying, we want an appointment in the riding, right? And you just, again, you be persistent, assertive, but persistent and polite to try and get that meeting. And like, I sometimes would have, 8 meetings a day. Like, it would be literally back to back to back. That was no big deal. That was my job. This was my job, to meet with constituents. I would also go to events. And so if you find out that your MP is going to an event, sometimes they'll put it on their website. You could also go buttonhole someone at a local event. But the best thing is to try and get a meeting. So you shouldn't feel bad about it. MPs are very well paid. They have resources, they have offices, they have support. So don't feel like, oh my God, I shouldn't really be bugging them. Yes, you should. This is democracy, okay? And it's okay to do.
Thank you for that encouragement, Libby. And any other comments or questions? I think that people are kind of having to bow out as we go along, but just sort of hold it open for any closing comments or thoughts or responses. Oh, Renee, go ahead.
Just one question, please. The form emails from outside the riding, the ones that you don't write yourself, I can see that they wouldn't pay any attention to that, but are they counted?
Yes, usually, ballpark. So when campaigns get really, really big, they do have an impact. They do. I know that. You start to pay attention. And this is where, we haven't really talked about this much, but this is where the internal dynamic at the caucus becomes really important, because, every party has a national caucus meeting every week in Ottawa, usually on Wednesday morning before the House starts at 1:45. And most parties have regional caucuses. So for example, the federal NDP, they have a BC caucus of MPs from BC. They also meet regularly every week in Ottawa. I forgot what was the question again? What did you say?
If the
right.
I know.
Yeah. So where I was going with this, so at those caucus meetings, people talk. what's going on. People often give a little report about what's going on in their riding, particularly when they've come back to Ottawa after being in the riding for a couple of weeks. And, you know, some MP X will say, my God, I got so many emails on da-da-da-da-da. Did you? What did you say, right? So there's talk going on. So this is why anything that you can do to encourage internal discussion. So, you know, to Alistair, you know, have you talked to Don Davies or Heather Mcpherson? You know, does this come up in your caucus? Will you raise it in your BC caucus? Right? Get it on the agenda, right? So the volume of emails, again, has an impact because people are paying attention. You may not get a reply, but believe me, the staff and the MP is watching all of these balls that are kind of up there, high and low, and where they're going and what you respond to. And sometimes you're forced to respond to issues that you don't particularly want to respond to because it's very clear that it's becoming a big issue locally in your riding, and you have to respond, right? You know, because otherwise you start getting a really bad reputation.
Great,
Thanks.
you,
Libby.
Mariana.
One more question here. Might it be, could we ask to meet with the BC caucus for, say, tell them we want to talk to them for 15 minutes or something about this, the BC NDP caucus? Is there any precedence for people getting to do that?
It's rare. It has happened. It's even harder to get a meeting at the national caucus because it takes so much time. And in fact, I can only speak for the NDP. I don't know about other parties. We almost kind of ruled it out because we just got inundated, and so we would generally say meet with a critic, right? We would say, you know, group X, go meet with a critic. And then if the critic wanted to report back to the caucus, they could. So I do remember on occasion that the BC caucus would meet with someone, but remember, most of their meetings are in Ottawa before the national, like the local caucuses meet before the national caucus. So every Wednesday morning at 8:30, we actually used to meet in my office. The BC caucus would meet, and then we'd go to the national caucus meeting of the NDP. And like very, very rarely we would have someone phone in. And even more rarely, we would have a meeting in Vancouver. Like once a year, we might do a little kind of organizing drive ourselves and decide to go visit Nanaimo, or we went to Alex Adamanenko's riding once actually. And when we went there, we would do local meetings. So that's pretty rare. And I don't know about other parties. So I wouldn't put a lot of time into that, Mariana, because I'm not sure how much it would pay off. But you could certainly try and contact the chair of the BC caucus, like figure out who it is. When you go onto there's not that many BC NDP MPs, so go onto each person's website because they're probably going to list who the BC chair is. They'll have it under their credentials, and you could phone that person and say, you know, if there were ever an opportunity that you guys are meeting as a group in Vancouver, we'd like to come and talk to you. Like, kind of put it on the radar.
Great, thank you for that. And we're coming down to, it's been almost an hour and a half, so I think that we can maybe cut it off here. And so we do have this on the recording. There are further follow-up questions. People have my email contact and Libby's notes she will send, and I can distribute to folks afterwards. And the recording will be available afterwards. So just to close in, first of all, thanking you so much, Libby, for sharing your experience and your time and your motivation, I think, to say that it's work, but it's doable, it's fun, and it's possible. And I think with a sense that as people who are about relationship, it really is about building trust and relationship, which I think is a part of what we are called to do. And so I think that to me is very motivating, inspiring, and hopeful. So thank you for that, Libby, and thanks to all of you. Thanks to Mariana and George, who've been so involved in shaping the campaign, and to the others of you who are here and continuing in this work and concern for this issue. So thanks so much for this
Jane,
time and your attention. Yes, Libby.
Jane, could I just say one thing about the issue? Because I actually never really spoke about the issue, but I do want to say that it's something that I support very strongly. I think it's a very good campaign. I think it's entirely doable because it is broad, it's nonpartisan, it comes out of that MP report, it's based on human rights, it's about children, you know, so I do think it's a tough one. I'm not going to fool you, it's tough, but I do think it's an issue that you can get some traction on. So I do want to encourage you in that way. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be speaking with you if I thought you were all out to lunch, to be honest. So you're not out to lunch. It's very doable. And yeah, so just, you know, get going on your homework and have fun. You know, it's like, it's good. So thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. And that's a wonderful note to end on. And so there will be continued conversations and work to be done ensuing from this conversation. So thank you again. And thanks for joining from Gambier Island. And the internet was fine for an hour and a half. So it was great.
It was good. Okay. Take care, everybody.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.